Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Mr. Ricky Dale Harrington Jr. Ricky, how are you doing today?
Too blessed to be stressed, as they say. Glad that you've allowed me to come on your show, sir. Very
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you because I bumped into you on Twitter, as these things go, and it turns out you ran for U.S. Senate just a couple months ago in the 2020 election in the great state of Arkansas. And as I've gone down the rabbit hole and learned a little bit about you, I'm absolutely fascinated with your background and some of your views, if I understand them correctly. So I'm hoping today we can explore some of your views on different policies in America and the rest of the world. Um, and one of the most interesting things, I think, is that you ran on the Libertarian ticket, not Democratic or Republican. So I'm wondering, first of all, how did you get into politics, and why did you decide to go the Libertarian route instead of one of the major parties?
Well, I've always been interested in politics as far as I can remember. I remember sitting on the couch with my dad watching the presidential election between Bill Clinton and Bush and watching them debate, not really knowing too much what they're talking about, but looking at my dad and watching his reaction, it's just something that's kind of talked about a lot, and a favorite pastime in my family. If someone just kind of peeks in, it looked like a big huge argument, but we're just debating. It's a pastime that we do. Come up with something, let's debate about it. That's kind of how I got into politics there.
I,
But
yeah, I love it. And how did you decide on the Libertarian ticket? Because for years, forever, it's been Democrats and Republicans. That's America.
well, this is something that call it intuition. And I was in China during the whole primary session for the 2016 presidential election, and so I was watching things from afar. And the hyperpartisanship, as I've stated through my entire campaign, it's getting a little too entrenched, and that was a reason for me to um, join the Libertarian Party. I voted for Gary Johnson. Obviously, it was a protest vote, but also I was getting more involved or getting ready to take that leap to join the Libertarian Party. And some of the planks, some of the basic core of libertarianism, I had held to that for a long time. And sometimes you have an idea of what something is, but you don't know what the term for it is. That's kind of the separation of knowledge. Because I can say one term to people that are a part of that organization, they'll automatically get it. But for people who don't know terms, sometimes it takes a long time to explain things. That's one of the interesting things of language.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was very impressed that you were able to get 33% of the vote, like a full third of the vote on the Libertarian ticket, because that's pretty rare. So I was definitely impressed by that, and I think it bodes well for the future of this country and the Libertarian Party. Seeing some higher numbers than 1 or 2 or 3%, up in the 30s, I think is much more impressive. So yeah, let's talk about some of your platform views, because I know you're pretty passionate about a few things like criminal justice reform and healthcare and a few others. So what would you say is sort of the most important issue to you? Like, if you could only fix one issue, what would be the issue you focused on?
I know it'll seem like an impossible task to do, but if I could fix just one thing, it would just be human beings from abusing one another, and that's it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Yeah, because it takes so many different forms.
Yes.
Mental, physical, financial, psychological, all these different things. So what are some of the abuses that you're seeing? We're in the year 2021 now, and as I look around America, I see abuses happening all the time. almost more than you can count. So what are some of the ones that you're seeing, and the ones that you'd like to fix?
Well, definitely in the criminal justice area, because of the powers that the government does exercise. Um, through the criminal justice system, if someone has done something wrong, they are stripped of certain rights, mainly the freedom to be able to move around freely, and just the normal things that come around with being incarcerated. But using that power that the government has to get rid of political opponents, or let's say you're in a position of power and there might be someone you don't like, or there might be some type of business opportunity for you, and using that to using your authority, using your position to make that vision that you have in your mind become reality is just gross. But especially working in the prisons and seeing some of the things that go on inside, we don't want innocent people there. We can't call ourselves a just people, a just nation, and have a just criminal justice system if, and I know we're human beings and nothing is ever perfect, but that is one thing we should definitely go after, is making sure that we don't have innocent people in prison.
Yeah, for sure. So can I ask a little bit more about what your prison work was like, in terms of why you were there, what you hope to accomplish, how much time you spent, and that sort of thing?
Well, I came back from China around July 2016, and like any responsible man that has a family to support, it's time to get a job real quick. And just going through the process of applying all different places. And someone had mentioned, why don't you try to be a chaplain at a prison? And let me tell you this, my father, he was a correctional sergeant, and he told me a whole lot of stories of how bad it was in prison. And so I was convinced this is something I never want to do. Never want to do. Scared straight to not get involved in any criminality, and scared straight to not even work there. And so that was really the only job that was available after applying for a lot of jobs. And once I got in at the Cummins prison, is where I spent most of the time. It was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. I will say it. Won't think twice about it. I'd do it again. The role of a chaplain is to kind of deal with some of the rougher realities of life. Particularly, one of our duties was to inform an inmate or inform a member of the public, like an inmate's relative, that has passed away. And so we usually have to verify whether something like that did happen, because there's a lot of games played inside the prison, and that's just nature of it. There's about 2,000 people that have broken the law, give or take, and hopefully there's no innocent people in there. But just the general idea, there's where a lot of criminals are. And Chris, I know that's so on the nose, but so we have to verify it. We go through a process to verify it, and then we call for the inmate to come to the office. And that was the very first death notification I had to give, was to an inmate whose brother was found in the back of a crushed car. So we had to tell him that's what happened to his relative. That was the first time I ever gave a notification like that inside the prison. So that was definitely not an easy one to cut your teeth on.
Yeah.
We also, of course, have to facilitate the First Amendment rights of all inmates, regardless of their religious preference. If there's a bona fide religious belief, we have a duty to help facilitate them in their religious expression. So I spend a lot of time working with the Muslim population in the prison. And there's a lot of different denominations of Islam, just like there is in Christianity. I'm thinking of a few other things that we were involved in. There's just counseling, not only, in a pastoral sense, not from a mental health perspective. Counseling inmates, counseling their families. There was times where I spent a considerable amount of time speaking with inmates' relatives, because for a great number of us, the world may turn their back on us, but mama is not going to do that. So there was a lot of calls from mamas checking up on the sons. And so there's a degree of having to work in an environment where there's competing ideas and competing type of positions that people have. Most people will be like, well, they did the crime, lock them up, throw away the key. But what people don't understand is that type of point, it shines a light on our own moral, the fabric of our moral makeup. If we just say, okay, this person has done this, we can do whatever to them because they're scum. They've done horrible things. And I'm telling you, there are some people that have done some really dangerous things. There's some dangerous men that are in those prisons, and some that have committed crimes that are they're horrible. And so it's my job to still extend compassion and try to restore the dignity that these men first took away from themselves to be able to do this to somebody else, to some other human being. It's a long process, but whenever you do happen to come across a man who's willing to change his life and willing to do whatever it takes, it's rewarding work.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. So is that something you're still doing, or was that just like a year, or how long was that?
Well, I did it for almost 2 years as a full-time state paid chaplain. And then my children were going through we were going through the diagnosis for autism for them. And I became a certified religious assistant, a volunteer chaplain. And then I returned to being what they call a treatment coordinator, program specialist. And so I oversaw all of the programs and all of the things aside from mental health and chaplaincy. I was a supervisor for the recreational department, the library, the recreational library, and the law library. Hobby craft, because inmates have a privilege once they get a certain class to be able to make leather belts, make clocks. And there's a lot of just amazing things. Those that have class and that have proven themselves to try to rehabilitate themselves and be upstanding men, they were able to see. I bought several leather belts from inmates, and that they get to keep. And some of them invest in other tools to make other things. And there's a lot of people that buy some high quality things from those guys. And so bringing in some of the material that they order, there's a lot of work. There was about 11 different areas that I had to supervise for, and a prison for about 2,000 inmates. So if they needed help, I didn't give them any legal advice. but we got them the resources needed, and kind of had to approve when inmates did a lot of pro se work that most inmates do. The typing had to approve the typing for some of the inmates that did work for me. That what they basically did, they took the handwritten form of their pro se work and typed it up, and handed it back to them for them to send it to the courts. So basically ensuring that they had access to the courts.
Nice. And in your time, working in the prisons, did you ever feel like your own safety, your own health was in jeopardy? Being around such dangerous men.
Um, no, I love what I did. I'll tell you this. There was they kind of separate those that prison in Cummins. They separated it East Hall, West Hall. The East Hall was where a lot of the Class 4 inmates were located. Some of the real tough guys. And I walked into one of the barracks, and I just walked in. They have telephone pole style open barracks, so it's not like the what you think, the tiers with the cells, at least in this particular part of the prison. So I walked in there and let the door shut behind me, and one inmate said, "Hey, chap, why you let that door shut there behind you? We could just jump on you." I said, "Okay, all right. I'm at least going to punish one of y'all." And he said, "All right, then." That was it. There were times that I did feel uncomfortable because now that I did feel uncomfortable with, of course, there are some people that are sexually dangerous people in those prisons, and some of them have attacked men. So, I mean, this is just straightforward, brutally honest. What hot take, I guess you could say. I walked into restrictive housing, is what they call it. It's when I had just first started, and the senior chaplain was telling me to go places and get familiar and learn the ropes. So I walked into, at that point in time, it was called administrative segregation, now called restrictive housing. And the inmate yelled at me, "Hey, man, let me get that face. Let me see that face." And if you get the gist of what he was saying, let me see your face so I can do some nasty stuff. And then someone yelled out, "Hey, man, that's the new chaplain." And he's like, "Oh, man, that's the chaplain. Oh, you should have told me." So that's it's kind of against prison code to do things against chaplains, because it's our job to try to help inmates.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow, it's like a whole different world in those prisons, I guess.
It is. It has its own economy. It has its own code, own culture and language. And one thing that was deeply impressed upon me was, in a place that's such a powder keg that could blow up at any moment, you have to make it a cognizant effort to be respectful to people, because a fight could break out, somebody could get stabbed, a riot. Those things happen in those places. And so, you address everyone as Mr. So and so. You address them as Chaplain so and so, or Sergeant so and so, Captain so and so, so on and so forth. Everyone is, it's drilled into everyone there to be respectful to one another.
It's definitely a good lesson because I see, out in the broader world on social media, let's say on Twitter, people often don't treat each other with respect. And I see so many examples, and I just think if you said that to somebody in person, they wouldn't appreciate it. Let's put it that way. As people using language and so forth. So I think that's a nice lesson, is being respectful, like treating people just with respect, like regardless of what they're saying or where they're coming from, or what their opinions are. So yeah, as you look around, and see like the people in America now, and things we see on the news, social media, and how we treat each other, do you see respect? Do you see disrespect? Like what is going on in your opinion?
I see a lot of disrespect. I see a lot of disregard for the basic dignity of humanity. I see, a lot of people concerned with their own opinions rather than this is something that, we are taught, especially as missionary, um, but more so for, some of the American Christian apologists who are, so concerned with being right that they lose the person. And, whether a person becomes a follower of Jesus Christ is, of course, very important for someone that is a clergyman and following the Great Commission. But if we go so far for just being right that we lose the potential relationship with a human being, um, it's it's not worth it. Sometimes being right it's not worth it, especially at the expense of doing the right thing. We might be right academically or from an argumentative standpoint, but whenever we begin to dehumanize one another, whenever we stop being forthright and just like I'm talking to you and I want to have a genuine conversation with you. Um, I don't want to employ any type of deception in the way that I speak. That's rampant in our politics, and we just have to get to a point right now in our country where compromise is not a bad word, where some of the ideals of Republicans or the ideals of Democrats, um, they have their place in this country, as well as libertarian ideals or Green Party ideals, or fill in the blank of whatever political party, as long as it does not take away from people's dignity, human dignity.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it seems like, you mentioned, the desire to be right. And it does seem like there's a lot of people who are trying to push their version of truth, their version of rightness on everyone else at the expense of human dignity. And it seems to me like the correct way to go about it is to honor human dignity as number one. And then, as you're honoring other humans around you, practice not trying to be right, but how to disagree in a civil way, like how to disagree respectfully. That to me seems like that should be the goal. Not being right and pushing your version of truth on everyone else, and dehumanizing them. In my mind, that's kind of how I see it.
If you take a look at the political swing and cycles in our country, um, usually born out of, okay, one side is took power or a trifecta, both a federal trifecta or on a state level. And it's all about, okay, we're going to push whatever our agenda is and not be considerate to the minority. And I don't mean minority just in the sense of racial minority. I mean it in the sense of political, because this is the arena that we're discussing. And we need to get back to that type of legislative agenda and in the form of the executive office as well. That type of administration and administration that I'd hope to have, or want to have, and hope to execute as governor of Arkansas is one that is considerate of all the positions and try to coalesce the valid, workable points from all the different perspectives into something that can work for all people. And you might not get 100% of what you want, or the other group might not get 100% of what they want, but there's a nice, happy medium for all of us to find a benefit in this country.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so just a few months ago in 2020, you ran for Senate, and it looks like in 2022 you've already decided to run for governor, and that's your Twitter banner. So if you were governor of Arkansas today, if you were governor today, what types of things would you try to implement, to make the state, function better?
This is a common thread I hear from a lot of Arkansans. It's that our state consistently ranks last on a lot of things. When it comes to education, definitely criminal justice. Um, Arkansas is a predominantly rural state. Fayetteville is a big metropolitan area, Little Rock, Jonesboro. Then there's also Texarkana, which is right on the border of Texas and Arkansas. But there's a lot of issues with, internet access there for a lot of the rural communities. And so I would want to try to build up some of the rural communities. There's a chaplain that trained me said, we shut down the schools and building more prisons. And that's how we really solve a lot of the criminal justice issues is in the schools. Building children up, really building them up, giving them options, getting parents involved, getting communities involved, letting communities decide what direction is best for them. A lot of people that talked to me during my Senate race, they asked me, well, what are you going to do for education? And I talked about, what role a United States Senator has in education. It's usually a federal level, but on a state level, most of the licensing is issued by the states, not the federal government. Like teacher's license, there's not a federal teacher's license. You get a license from the state of Arkansas. If you happen to live in Arkansas, you live in Texas, you get your teacher's license from Texas, so on and so forth. And the number one thing that people bring up is money. We don't have enough money to build up our education. Well, there's a lot more resources than just money. People are a resource, and if you have someone that's good at teaching, but they don't have the bachelor's degree or the money to go to college, there should be an alternative pathway for people to demonstrate they have the competency and the skill to become a teacher. And at the same time, we know that there needs to be standards. We know that for the benefit of our country, the benefit of the state, or even down to the local level, having people that are well informed and able to make sound decisions is a benefit. So we want to be able to provide. This is one thing I would work on, because I'm totally an occupational licensing reformist. Well, again, I might be circling around here, but I'm kind of going through the whole thought process. Okay, we need better education is what people say. Well, what's preventing us from having better education? Let's go ahead and fill that out. But it's usually money that people start off with. That might be the case, but is there another way that we can fix it? And so occupational licensing, I got my sights on that for Arkansas. There are over 350 boards and commissions in Arkansas that deal with how these professions work. And to be honest, I see them as barriers to entry into the workforce and keeping lower income individuals from being able to move up into the middle class or start their own business, whatever. Whenever you have a monetary benchmark for someone to start a business, it just seems like a barrier to entry to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's absolutely the case. And yeah, I've spent a lot of time in education. It's it's a big passion of mine, and that's partly why this show is called Somewhat Scholarly. But yeah, and I think, if you want to look and see where a society is going, look at how they treat their children. That's something I believe so strongly. And as I look around and see, like, how are we treating our young people today? It like breaks my heart. Like, I think the way we treat our kids is, honestly, I think it's kind of dehumanizing in many ways. I think the way, like, our schools are operating, based on federal standards, it almost treats children like factory products, not like human beings.
Mm.
And I think that's is really terrible. And it seems like if you step back and look at like what the educational process is, like K to 12, it almost looks like the goal is like an assembly line where you're just trying to, like, ship Amazon boxes of, like, 10 million that are all identical. It looks like that's the goal of education. And to me, as I look at young human beings, like young adults, I think the goal should be figure out your unique strengths, figure out who you are as a person. What are your passions? What are your interests? What do you want to do? It shouldn't be like assigning them, 5 stars, or 100 points, or any of these weird numbers that are all just made up. It should be, treating them like humans, like individuals, and trying to, light a fire in them, or ignite the fire, and let them spark their curiosity and run with it. In my mind, that's what school should be. And it just seems like we're not doing that. And on top of the fact that, there are all these other problems related to money and certification and all these other things that you're talking about. It's just, I used to work in the education industry. I was a teacher, a tutor, a professor, and a principal. And I just finally had to get out. I just said, like, this system is so broken, I can't fix it from the inside. It's so
Mm.
broken. And that's why I turned to YouTube. I mean, it's better than nothing. At least, if nobody wants to watch it, they don't watch it. And if they do want to watch it, they do watch it. And I think I would love to see our children having that much choice and autonomy over what they choose to do with their time.
I've been reading a biography about Ulysses S. Grant. And during that time, the way people got education, it was completely different from, the way we do it now. It's very structured, very, boxed in. This is the only way to do it. And, if we think about human history, a lot of great discovery has happened by people who didn't even have what we have, this K through 12 type of educational system. I'm thinking of one of my favorite people of history is Michael Faraday. Came from nothing and became the head guy of the Royal Academy of Science in Britain. And some of his discoveries, he wasn't very good at math. And some of his discoveries in electromagnetism, they still affect us today. The things that we have right now are still built off his little simple electromagnetic machine that was twirling around in this beaker. And I just think we don't give enough credit to the process of acquiring information is variable, is fluid. It's not just this one set way of doing things. And going back to U.S. Grant, I don't think he spent that much time in school aside from his, of course, years at West Point. And he had to have some type of foundation to be able to, successfully graduate from West Point. But there's probably a lot of people that are in the system that don't get a chance to grow up to their full potential, their intellectual potential, or whatever potential that they might have, because they don't do well in this particular style of teaching. And, I think a lot of people that subscribe to libertarianism is, people kind of need more options, more opportunities to discover who they are, and ways to learn.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yes, it's true that, before we had standardized education, which I think started in either 1904, 1906 maybe is when we got the Board of Education. And we had all those years before, not just in America but all over the world, right? Like Ulysses S. Grant and so forth. All these brilliant minds. But even during that period of time, if you look around today at a lot of the most successful inventors, entrepreneurs, athletes, politicians, even many of them dropped out of school, like didn't go to college, dropped out of high school, something like that. So some people make the argument that like you can't be successful without an education, but we have so many obvious examples to the contrary, people who have succeeded without that formal education. So yeah, I mean, I definitely would love to see way more options for young people, way more options. And I think if it were up to me, I would just sort of not require children to go to government school. That it would just be the simplest way, and try to create legislation that incentivizes people to come up with private schools, charter schools, and the whole mix of things. So that's how I would do it. I don't know about you.
I'm thinking about a lot of the rural communities that don't have the funds that some other big schools might have in other areas. And so their argument, of course, they bring up, we don't have the funds that this school doesn't have, and so that's why we are failing at these standardized tests that we have to take all the time. But I think maybe some of those communities, if we can help them, um, just give them the resources. Again, not just financial resources, but I think people need to invest themselves a little bit in volunteering. Um, I think that's just a big thing for people to do. To really learn about yourself whenever you take the time away from your life and doing what you like to do to go help someone else, you learn a lot of things. First off, you learn there are people that don't live like I do, have a different worldview. There are people that are suffering while I might be living well. And each of us specializes in something, and we have something special about each of us. And to share that with someone else is one of the highest forms of generosity. And having more volunteers in the school. We also want to, make sure that students are safe and there's no predators coming in or some unsavory individual. But encourage a lot of prominent people in the community. Maybe someone has a successful plumbing business. Well, show up to the ag class and teach the students how to do plumbing. Or if fill in the blank, you're an accountant, show up and tell kids about taxes and numbers. I think about some of the things that I learned and whether or not I've used them frequently in my daily life. Uh, Aside from public speaking classes and things like that in science and physics, um, and English, of course. English, of course, I'm speaking it may not speak it that well all the time, but there's always room for improvement, and I don't think we're at the pinnacle of human achievement.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I agree. We got a long way to go, but it's exciting to keep improving things. That's for sure. So something I got to ask you about is actually your pinned tweet. I'm kind of changing gears here. If I remember, it's
You read my mind. You read my.
yeah, it's something. You're going to be accepting Bitcoin for your next campaign. So yeah, how did you hear about Bitcoin, and what do you think about it, and why are you choosing to accept it?
I heard about it, of course, a long time ago, but just never paid it any mind because I didn't chase after the information for myself, nor knew anyone that was well acquainted with it. And recently, I'll say several months ago, someone had introduced the idea to me that, why don't you accept Bitcoin as a contribution for your next campaign? And then I just went down that rabbit hole and totally bought into it. Actually, I'm doing some mining right now myself. Um, some SIA and Decred. I got a really cheap obelisk from eBay, and I'm just learning about it. But I think that it is a way forward for us, especially when countries get involved in the battles and OPEC going to war with the dollar. And those things of what's going to happen to the people when our leaders puff the chest out, beat on the chest, and try to see who's the bigger man or woman. Um, those nothing against type A personalities or anything like that. Or is there such a thing as type A personality, or is it just some clever cultural psychology that fad? But anyway, the people are kind of trapped at the whims of those our leaders, so to speak. And one of the last bastion of libertarianism that I was yet to kind of fully buy into was the monetary policy that is prevalent in libertarianism, and some of the charges that have been laid against the Federal Reserve by those who subscribe to libertarianism, and the central banks. And I think it is a wise hedge for people if there was some type of economic collapse to still be able to have a system of trading. Now, I know a lot of people are investing in it to try to extrapolate, dollars by investing in crypto. But I think we need to be able to conceptually separate the value of a coin from the dollar. And whenever the people begin to do that, that's whenever it's never going away. Once we do that. And so for me, mining SIA and mining Decred is personally just going long on this crypto thing. I'm totally sold going long on it. If it happens if the ones that I do invest in happen to go up and there is some dollars to extrapolate out of it, I'll do it. I'm not going to talk like a hypocrite. I will do it. But there are a few, especially the ones that have a sort of function attached to the coin. Most of those I'm going along with.
Yeah, nice. It's a beautiful thing, and it's so excited to be a part of the crypto revolution. Bitcoin is probably my favorite coin because it does represent, to me anyways, sound money. And once we have that, then it kind of allows us to have all these other utility coins and all these amazing technologies that are instant and free and smart, like smart contracts and that sort of thing. It's just incredible for me to be a part of it, and I can't wait to see the future we build on top of all these cryptos.
Yes, I know. There's such a crunch right now to find some type of mining equipment, and GPUs are way up there, up 1,000 last time I looked, and then I stopped looking and started looking for some ASIC miners. Some people have issue with the ASICs because most of them come out of China, and most of the big pools, like F2 pool in China, big, huge hash rate, 40%. And so I hate to be hawkish on China, but I spent 2 years over there, and this is a question that I did ask a couple of people because I'm always self-reflective on a lot of things. I guess by nature, because as a clergyman, you teach people how to make changes in their lives and how to be their better self. How can you even do that if you don't apply it to yourself first? So while I was there was a lot of cultural things you had to become acclimated to. One of the first things that happened to me was there was this elderly gentleman that was selling fruit. He had a fruit shop, and he came up to me and he touched my arm like he was rubbing on my skin. And he said, I didn't know there were any black people in America. And I looked at my wife and I was like, does this guy not know that the president of the United States is black? I mean, he comes to China, and I know they have to put them all on CCTV,
Yeah.
or anything that Obama said. I know it's on CCTV. And so people would always ask me how much I weigh. I mean, just on the street, how much you weigh? San Bai Jing. And I would tell them, I weigh 500 pounds. And then they're like, no, you're just messing around with us. And just laugh it off and walk off. The Chinese people, very friendly, very hospitable. Don't meet a stranger. But there were also some things that, of course, you had to struggle with whenever you have to acclimate to another culture. And some things that we would just consider outright rude. This is just, of course, trying to adapt to another culture. So I would ask someone, because I got to a point to where, there were some negative opinions that I was beginning to develop that were I was having within myself that were starting to sound like, someone that was racist would be saying. And so I'd ask, another missionary, hey, I'm kind of going through this right now. This really sounds like some racist type of thoughts to me. Or is it just me struggling with culture shock? And so luckily I had someone that was there to kind of help me process what I was going through. And then you get to that point to where you get to a level of normalcy in the culture. So yeah, that's my little story there of, am I becoming a racist?
Yeah.
Am I racist? But again, not to be too academic here. From my understanding of the definition of racism, it has to deal with one class oppressing another class. And I hear this talk all the time. In the prisons, take the racism that we have out in the free world with people and multiply it by 10. That's what it's like in the prisons. If I hired somebody, if I had a job and I had got rid of the inmate no longer was working at that job, and there were 2 slots, or if there was 1 slot and the former person that had the job was either white or black, by the code that's in the prison, I have to either hire 1 black or 1 white, or the next person I hire has to be the other race. That's just the unspoken. It's not unspoken because they talk about it all the time, but as part of the code there in the prisons. So yes, there are people that are of different races can discriminate with one another. And let's talk about race. Let's go there.
Yeah, let's do it. So what are your thoughts on race? Because it's certainly a hot button issue. It's like in the news all the time now, and like I can't check Twitter without seeing like #racist or something like that. And it doesn't really attract a lot of my attention. It's just not something I want to like, sink into. But yeah, how are you seeing things? Racism or accusations of racism or just racial issues. Like how are you seeing things?
I first want to talk about the main issue that nobody wants to talk about, and that is how people that are white perceive the issue of race. And whenever we talk about racism in America, a person that happens to be white might get defensive. Not everyone, I can't speak for all of them, but if you take a look online, there are some kind of knee-jerk reactions. And I'll use this analogy. It's not really an analogy, but this is what happened again while I was in China. I taught English, obviously, but I taught, they called it oral English over there. They would separate English into different parts: speaking, writing, and then like a higher level academic writing. And so I taught some of the postgraduate medical students spoken English. Some of the undergraduate students spoken English. And at the time that I was in China, it was like the height of anti-Japanese sentiment. They also had the big parade that only Vladimir Putin showed up to. That was a parade celebrating the 70th anniversary of the end of Japanese aggression. I'll remember that. I probably won't ever forget that for the rest of my life. And so a lot of my students, they would kind of regurgitate what was said in the propaganda that was put out. So I asked them this question. I said, how many of you have relatives that fought in World War II against the Japanese? Nobody raised their hands. How many of you have any relatives that were tortured, killed against the Japanese? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you know of anybody that participated in that war or suffered at the hands of the Japanese? No one raised their hands. And of course, I, take a little pause for a second to explain that, East Asian cultures have a totally different, view that we have when it comes to those type of relations, and especially the atrocities committed by the Japanese during World War II. So I'm not trying to explain that away at all. The Japanese did some the Imperial Japan did some very terrible things during World War II, like bayoneting pregnant women. And so there's, whenever you live in a homogenous culture, there's a big connection that you have with people who you're not even related to. Okay, all right. So I'm done with that little disclaimer tangent there. So I told my students about my own experience whenever I was 18 years old at a bowling alley in Marshall, Texas. And I chunked a ball down there real fast. And it went down there and jumped up all around. And a couple of minutes later, there was this dude coming up to me and he said, "You want through that ball down there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, and there was two other gentlemen with this older white gentleman. And he said, "Well, I'm from the old school. We got AK-47 and a noose. We'll drag your black ass behind the truck and then string you up in a tree and shoot you." And I was there with a group of some of my high school classmates, and they were Caucasian. They all laughed at it. So, I mean, how does that make a person feel? And then I told my students, I don't make every white person I come in contact with pay for the mistakes of those three men. They did that. It's their fault. It's not the fault of every other white person that I encounter. Now that kind of perked up their ears there, and they were like, "Wow, maybe we shouldn't look at Japanese people like that. They're human beings just like us, or we shouldn't just make a blatant statement about an entire people group. We have to see others as individuals." Now, in saying that, I would hope that people that happen to be of a different race than I am, that happen to be white, would take a moment to just not feel the knee-jerk reaction, but to reflect on am I like the people that laughed at someone threatening to kill one of my friends with ritualistic murder? What would you do in that situation?
Man, me personally, phew, it's so outside the realm of like anything I've experienced that it's really hard to answer. Yeah, and I grew up in New York, not Arkansas, so yeah, different world,
This is the point we have to get to move past this issue of racism in America. We have the overt racism, and then we have the subtle. We buy into things all the time subconsciously. I was talking to one of my friends the other day. You know, why do we shake hands? Well, there's a reason why. It came from during the medieval times. Someone extended their hand to show they didn't have a weapon as a form to extend, a hand of peace. Now we do it as a form of greeting. And another analogy from, learning cultural anthropology during my training, to be a missionary and a member of the clergy. And they came up with this analogy here of the ham in the pot with the ends cut off. I don't know if you've heard this.
I don't think so.
Well, at Thanksgiving, mom, she cuts the ends off on the ham. And one of the kids asked, why do we cut the ham ends off on the ham? And well, it's something that my mom did. So they go to grandmother and ask grandmother, why did you do that? Well, it's something my mom did. And, if you're lucky to have Big Mama around, you can go ask Big Mama why you do that. And she's like, well, the ham was just too big for the pot I had, so I cut off the ends.
Yeah.
There's always some form of practical reason why we, do the things that we do, and they just become tradition. But always ask me, why do I do this? Why do we do this? Or why do we believe what we believe? And that's where we need to get to in this country. Why are we still today, after 200 plus years, still dealing with these issues of race? Well, that's because we really haven't dealt with it in its entirety. It's been piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there. And just from the time of blacks being freed to, the signing of the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, 100 years there. I mean, and then we're how far removed from that, and we're still dealing with, it's a system. And I want people to understand that it is a system. It is deeply ingrained in our culture. And I don't want you to feel less of a human being, because there are terrible human beings out there, but I do need your help. I do need you to take some time to be self-reflective and to see how we can fix this. And also, those who are oppressed also have to take the time to be self-reflective as well. We're never going to make any change unless we just get down to earth with one another and bare our hearts to one another if we want to make real lasting change.
Yeah, I totally agree. I myself was raised Catholic Christian, um, and at the time, I wouldn't say that I necessarily believed everything. And shortly after my confirmation, I spent a few years as an atheist, as sort of like a real math and science guy that just couldn't find a good argument for God, couldn't find any reason for it. Anyways, I've since become spiritual. And the reason I mention all this is because when I look at another person, or even a dog or a cat or just any animal, I see a divine light in every other living creature. Everybody. To me, it doesn't matter what your race is, or if you're even a human or a dog or whatever. And so I try my best to treat everyone like they have the divine light in them, because I believe that they do.
Mm.
And that to me is my spirituality that has really helped me. I'll say, not have a lot of problems in my life. I feel like, whether they're racial or anything else, and I'm certainly not going to claim to be oppressed. I'm like a straight white male. I mean, like there's nothing. I haven't faced anything, systemic or otherwise. But like that's my viewpoint, is really just treating everyone like they have God in them, because I think they do. I mean, I do believe that, and I guess I want to live in a world where everyone treats everyone like that. It'd be a beautiful world in my mind.
If you will indulge me,
Sure, yeah.
I'll tell you my conversion story.
Okay.
Um, I was an atheist, and my belief was whoever God was, I hated him, because I just took a look at all the suffering in this world, and it's the same question: how can there be a loving God with this much trash going around here, or an omnipotent God that has the power to do anything, to speak the universe into existence, speak it into existence? And I was just like, no, 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 I'm not with that. Um, but I also was a fan of the occult. This is just me being honest here. And so I got clicked up with some of my old high school buddies when I first went to college. And they were smoking a whole lot of weed and talking about the Bible. And yeah, I was smoking a whole lot of weed with them too. And so I got to a point to where I said, "Hey, I like weed. God made everything right, and He said it was good. So I guess I want to hear what else this God has to say." So after I got out of class, I would go home, order up a bowl, and read the Bible until it was time for me to go to work at Pizza Hut. And this lasted for a couple of months. And I was hanging out with some of my friends that were rolling with the Latin Kings. They were selling not just no little diamond bags or nickel bags. They were moving big weight. And so I had got to a point to where I was about to leave, kind of using substances, because I felt that pull toward becoming a Christian. And so my friends gave me a call, and they were like, "Hey, you want to come hang out? I know you're not smoking weed anymore, but we still like for you to hang out with us." And so I had kind of like a little crisis of conscience, because I didn't want to leave my friends behind just because I'm making this progression to becoming a spiritual religious person. And so I just fell flat on my face in prayer, just saying to God, "I know that you have this standard for me, and I can't do it on my own. And I need your help for me to be able to, because I don't want to abandon my friends. I don't want to be that type of person." And after I got up from laying on that ground, praying to God, asking Him for strength, I got up, and I didn't I was not bothered by them smoking in front of me at all. And I continued to do what I had been doing with them, which was sharing what I was learning in the Bible. And at this one point in time, I was reading the scripture today, and it was from James. And if you've done any studying in James, James is like the Proverbs of the New Testament. Real straightforward, no nonsense, no beating around the bush type of faith walk. And the latter portion of James, it talks about, people confessing sins to one another so they can be healed. So in prayer to God, I said, "Yes, I confess this sin to you, but don't let me have to confess it to anybody else." And I called up my friend who was the drug dealer, shacked up with his girlfriend, um, selling drugs, and he's still my friend to this day, brother. And asked him if he wanted to go shoot basketball with me. He was like, "Yeah, just come pick me up. We can go shoot basketball." And whenever I walked in the door, he said, "Hey, Rick, the reason I called you over here is I wanted to pray with you." And so we got to talking about the meaning of life And somehow we ended up on the subject of confession. And I know this is going to sound crazy here, but I'm telling you this happened. We got on the subject of confession, and I thought to myself, yes, confession is good, but I'll never confess that sin to anyone else. As soon as I had got done thinking that thought, my friend, who was the drug dealer, shacked up with his girlfriend, selling drugs and all that other type of things. He leaned back in his chair and put his hand over his face, and he said, "The reason you won't confess is because Satan is deeply embedded in your soul." It was like someone had took a spear and rammed it into my heart. And right there at that moment, I confessed that sin that earlier that day I'd asked God not to allow me to confess to anybody, but only to Him. So that for me is like the bedrock of my faith. Because that's the whole point of any type of religion, is to have some type of relationship with the deity. And if there's no real relationship there, I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? So anytime, and there have been times that I've doubted that. I've tried to rationalize it. There's no way that can happen. And every time I go through that rationalization, there was something that didn't happen the way that I interpreted it. I called my friend up and I was like, "Man, am I just imagining something?" And he's like, "No, it happened." And he's not a member of the clergy or anything like that himself, but yeah, that's my conversion story right there. Becoming a follower of Jesus Christ.
Wow. I love it. It's beautiful. I love hearing about powerful moments like that, for sure. And yeah, I guess for me personally, I've just had too many events that just felt like really strong coincidences, like too many of them, where it just feels like, you know what, there has to be something divine. There just has to be. And as much as I wanted to like rationalize it and explain it away, at some point in my life I just couldn't. So for me, it wasn't necessarily just one thing. It was really just sort of paying attention to what was going around and realizing that, certain things just fit together so well. It just at a certain point became undeniable for me. Like, okay, there's some guiding hand here. I don't know what it is. You can call it God. I mean, that's a very convenient word to use, obviously. Sometimes I call it the universe or Mother Nature or God. But to me, there's something. There's something, and it's in us. It's through us. Yeah, and I think it's beautiful, to be honest.
From I like physics. I'm not a physicist or anything like that, but I like to read and try to keep up on things, and especially quantum physics. And some physicists say that there's 11 dimensions up to like 26 dimensions. So we're three-dimensional creatures living in four dimensions. Um, what is it like to communicate with a being that lives in the sixth or seventh dimension? What would you call that being that could, see or do things that are higher, beyond our dimensions that we currently live in or what we can perceive? I think we would call that being God, that can, do things that human beings can't do. It would seem supernatural. And so from my analytical type of mind, I think of we have difficulty in trying to wrap our minds around some of the concepts of, like, Jesus Christ was God before, but then he became a human being. How does that work? How can you be somewhere before and after, but also present in this physical realm that we live in? And so I've kind of used quantum physics to kind of like rationalize that. Because I mean, really, if you think about it, if some being lives in the higher dimension, this little three dimension is really nothing. Just like one dimension or two dimensions is nothing to us. I mean, this little sheet of paper here, I can do just about anything I want to this little sheet of paper. I can cover it up with whatever I want to do with it. It might be getting a little too philosophical.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, actually, what's funny is when I went to college, I started as a physics major. So like I'm totally a math science guy, and ultimately switched to business. And like I said, I spent a lot of time in education. But like I'm totally right with you with the physics thing and the dimensions and so forth. So yeah, it's like something that can manipulate dimensions higher than the three we live in would absolutely seem like a superpower for sure. So yeah, but even beyond that, because if you think about it, let's say there's whatever 6-7 billion people on the earth. Suppose there are 6 or 7 billion multi-dimensional beings, and one of them's manipulating us this way, and others manipulating us this way, and so forth. And maybe certain things cancel out, or we don't notice it. But if there is like one ultimate divine omnipotent being, God, it would seem that he, she, it could control even the 11-dimensional beings and so forth, and provide some guidance that is more powerful than any of the beings can control. At least in my view.
Yeah, that's if you take a look at some of the books, Daniel is one thing that first comes to mind. The Book of Enoch, which is some of the Apocrypha. And this is the interesting thing here. If you ever read Jude, they have a little portion in Jude where the Archangel Michael and the Satan are arguing over the body of Moses. Where does that come from? Where does it come from? It's nowhere in the Bible I've seen. But it came from the pseudepigrapha and some of the apocryphal writings, like the Book of Enoch. It deals with a lot of the demonology in the Hebrew tradition, and the angel, who the angelic beings and all those type of things. And so that little story there of them arguing over the body of Moses came from the Apocrypha, and it found its way in Jude's epistle, writing to the Christians there. So I think it's it's a treasure trove of places to dig around and find knowledge if you're willing to go there. I know I just mean anybody, but I know some people that don't like to talk about it, and if they don't, I don't try to force them anything, because conversation should be willingness and consensual. Let's talk about these hard to talk about issues nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I do want to be sensitive of the time. So I don't know. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch upon? Maybe like a message you have for any Americans or Arkansans who may be listening.
Well, this message, as long as I'm involved in politics, it'll be the same message, that we need to get back down to the basics of treating one another with dignity and respect, especially in the realm of politics, because whenever we stop talking to one another, the next step is usually not a good step. Usually we result to violence, and that's what any area of human relationships, but especially right now in this country, just everybody's talking at one another instead of listening. And as again, we talked a little bit about, my Christian faith, and in Arkansas, the Arkansas GOP says their principles come from the Bible, and I just don't see it in the politics. And James brought it up. One of the scriptures from James is that we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because man's anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And we're all outraged about everything right now. And we're talking at one another rather than listening to what the other party has to say, and then trying to come up with a solution. So, this is who I am as a person of faith. But I'm not going to try to set up some form of a theocracy in politics. We definitely have a separation there. But what I hope to do as governor of Arkansas is to come up with solutions rather than be a representative of one group, but of all Arkansans. We need to be focusing on solutions, just like at any job that you work on with professional people. And they're like, let's work the problem. We're not working the problem right now. We're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a beautiful message, one of respect and just working together. I think that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you or follow your upcoming campaign?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. My handle, I did change it to Rick D. Harrington. Also, find me on Facebook. There's still a Facebook page there. I still put out a little content. Website is rickyharrington.com. It still has some of the old Senate stuff, but as soon as we get a little revenue in, it will be changed. And those complicated things for third-party candidates. But stick with me on Twitter. I'll try to continue to be engaged with people there, and we will be making a formal announcement soon and getting ready to convince the people of Arkansas that I'm going to be their governor, an even-handed, fair, consistent governor for the state of Arkansas.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Ricky, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to follow your journey. So I'll definitely be watching. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbert.
Thanks. Take care.